Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. I don't know if you've noticed, but Christopher Rufo and his pals have been real quiet as of late. You know when the enemy realizes they've lost, not by them waving the white flag and saying they're beat, but when they become quiet, because they're too scared to even come against you. But in Rufo's case, he thought that he was off to a hot start. He thought that he was on a roll. Well, apparently he rolled off a cliff. Now recently, Rufo had an interview with Glenn Beck of all people, and during this interview, I guess you would call it, Rufo made an interesting admission. What he said was that basically the little revolution that he called himself starting, well, apparently has run into a couple of bumps in the road, and one of them happens to be, as he put it, some people are being, kind of generously rewarded with clicks and attention who don't actually offer anything substantive. And I think it gets some of our audience and some of our listeners in this outrage cycle, where they're outraged for outrage's sake. Yeah, what's happened is Christopher Rufo can't understand why it is that his little old movement he thought he was going to start has run into all of these problems that seems to have stalled out. Now, I could just simply point out that the only reason anybody even knows who this clown is because of the phony racial hysteria that his rich white donors funded him to carry out over critical race theory. In other words, he was putting forward a solution, desperately looking for a problem. Critical race theory was going to be the bogeyman that he would use, basically a euphemism for all things black, and that's what he decided that he was going to go to attack because that's what he was paid to attack. And while the majority of the racist rubes who went along with his racial hysteria already knew that it was all fake, the problem with Rufo was he didn't actually have something that meant anything on the political landscape. It was just a stunt. And people figured that out soon enough. Rufo's little wannabe revolution has failed. He's pretty much said it, even wrote a book about it. And it failed for 3 reasons. First of all, he chose the wrong weapon. And worse than that, he went after the wrong targets. Instead of starting his asinine anti-black war in a blood-red state like Florida, he should have gone to a purple state and tried to change things there. Because if you're going to call yourself trying to start a nationwide anything, then you can't escape the fact that sooner or later you're going to have to get out of your comfort zone and go to a place where you're going to face actual opposition. Rufo didn't want to do that because, like all anti-black racists, he was just looking for an easy victory. Well, the problem with an easy victory is it doesn't move the needle. It doesn't get you anything. There's no gains there. It's not an accomplishment if you win a victory that you were guaranteed to get from the very beginning. He would make it a point to use his meaningless phrases, and he thought to himself that he was actually doing something, and I'm sure that the rich white donors who propped this clown up made him think to himself that he was on the inside track, but he's found out now that all of his genius wasn't very smart at all. Rufo is a creature of pure self-promotion, and it shows. What kind of idiot gins up a tsunami of phony outrage, lying about critical race theory, and then with the whole world watching him goes on Twitter and tells everybody that he was lying about it? What do you think he means when he tweets out stuff like, "We have decodified the term and will recodify it to annex the entire range of cultural constructions that are unpopular with Americans"? In other words, we're going to give a phony definition of what critical race theory means. We're going to invent a straw man that we're going to use to spread racial hysteria. See, if critical race theory actually meant what Rufo claimed that it did, he wouldn't have to recodify anything. This is an idiot who tries to use $5 words when a $1 word would have been just fine. But this shows how foolish he is and how full of himself he was. This is what happens when you have no wins. The first time that somebody pays you any attention at all, you immediately suffer from diarrhea of the mouth and tell everybody, hey, critical race theory is not a bad thing at all, but the thing is, I need it to be a straw man, so I'm going to try to see if I can redefine it somehow. And he says that he's intentionally doing so. So he admits that he's intentionally lying, and he also admits that critical race theory doesn't mean what he claims it does. Obviously, critical race theory isn't unpopular with Americans, because if it was, he wouldn't need to recodify it to try to make it so. Never underestimate the power of your own insecurity. Who tells a lie and then tells the world, by the way, I'm lying? What kind of fool does that? The kind who spent their entire lives in quiet desperation? That's who. See, before Rufo became a shill for a right-wing think tank, he originally tried and failed to become a documentarian. Did you know that? He wanted to be the next Dinesh D'Souza, a right-wing propagandist, but his efforts to become a would-be filmmaker flopped. In fact, Rufo's failed at everything he's ever tried. So when he got on with the Manhattan Institute, they assigned him to be an advisor to Ron DeSantis, who had also spent several years wandering in the wilderness, trying to make a name for himself during his brief, meaningless stint as a congressman. Do you notice a pattern forming yet? So Rufo and DeSantis saw a lot of similarities in one another, mostly failure. But the wealthy white donors who fund the think tanks that employ trash like Rufo already had a plan in motion. Try to scare white parents with lies that their children are being harassed by teachers in school. And what is this harassment that's being aimed at these white kids? Teaching them basic American history. The same American history that's been taught for the last 70 years. Oh, the horror. Those obnoxious white mobs that you saw attacking those school board meetings were by and large crisis actors organized and paid for by those same wealthy white donors who gave Rufo a job. Those incidents were staged because the entire idea was to manufacture some sort of pretense to give Rufo something he could point to and claim, see, angry white parents, this is the start of a revolution. Why, this is a social problem that needs to be addressed. Oh, and how convenient, the same donors who funded my think tank also funded the political campaigns for these racist red state Republicans over here, and they got some laws to address this little thing that we went ahead and set up. That's what actually happened. But like all amateurs and idiots, Rufo got out over his own skis and crashed. His plan was to demonize black people full time and ride that horse to glory. Only problem was the horse dropped dead. The more people found out about his little culture war, the less they liked it, and the less they liked him. Ron DeSantis figured passing idiotic message legislation that basically said he was outlawing anything he didn't like, principally black people. All of those stupid acts got struck down by the courts. Because they were never meant to be serious legislation, they were just a cheap way for him to get some face time on Tucker Carlson. Now, inevitably, the white left would get indignant with Rufo's antics, which was the entire point. That's what he said he was trying to do. He thought he had made it to the top of the mountain. He had actually made it into the news cycle on broadcast television, even a couple of newspapers. But morons like Rufo never figure out that with the 24-hour news cycle being what it is, that's a lot of hours of programming that needs to be filled by the television stations and a lot of column space that needs to be filled by the newspapers and magazines. And they gotta fill all of that space with something, so for a while they chose him. He wasn't special, he wasn't some genius, it was just his turn. And what he showed everybody was that he didn't learn anything from the rise and fall of Richard Spencer. Christopher Rufo, not surprisingly, has no political experience. All he wanted to do was to use red state governments to troll the political left. That was his assignment. And while that may delight racists like Rufo for a moment, the reality is those kind of over-the-top stunts always bring about a backlash. The people who you're antagonizing, sooner or later they're going to get tired of and they're going to organize against you. And that's exactly what happened down in Florida. Now, the second reason Rufo was damned to fail from the beginning is because his lifetime of failures made him desperate to convince people that he wasn't a screw-up, that he actually can succeed at something. So he gave the entire game away in front of the whole world. He wanted to show them, see, I'm not just a screw-up. I know what I'm doing. I actually made myself into something. That's what he wanted to do. See, I'm on TV. I must have made it. Sure, even Stevie Wonder could see through his grift, but I can't think of any political propagandist who's ever been dumb enough to tell the whole world they were lying. After Obama's 2008 presidential victory, Republican strategist Mike Murphy declared that the GOP had to get rid of its incompetent operative class. But rather than back down, the GOP and their rich white donors decided to double down. And that's how you got Rufo. And that brings me to the third reason that Rufo was damned to fail from the beginning. It's because his stupid plans could never work anyway. You don't change a culture by being a full-time political troll. And you don't change it by sending some half-cocked white mob to storm a school board meeting either. There's a reason why the veteran right-wing strategists never tried the stuff that Rufo pulled, because they know that there's a very thin line between galvanizing your base and galvanizing your opponents. Now, I know I said that there were going to be 3 reasons that Rufo failed, but I think I should add a 4th. And the 4th that I would add is that he began by attacking his opponents, when his first move should have been to get his own ragged racist forces in line. That's why he's running around now complaining on Glenn Beck's show that there are people out there who are just trying to get clicks and attention for themselves. They're not trying to help the cause. Seems to me that Rufo is feeling a little bit insecure right now, wondering if any of these other people out here might take away his little old job. They're going to horn in on his hustle. But I find it to be poetically beautiful that he's sitting here complaining about people who he claims are just outraged for outrage's sake. That's because that's what Rufo taught them. That's what he himself did. They're simply copying him. Rufo didn't have an actual plan. That's why having him as an advisor proved DeSantis wasn't going to go anywhere. Rufo doesn't have a vision. He's simply carrying out the orders that he gets from his white paymasters at the Manhattan Institute. But his feeble attention-whoring stunts could never make any real changes because he spent his time preaching to the choir. Then again, the white right knows their influence, even in their own red state strongholds, has been wavering. They've been watching the stress fractures form, and they haven't known what the heck to even do about it. They desperately want to make sure that they don't get weakened in their own homes. That's the reason why you saw those Republicans in Tennessee who lost their minds simply because Heckle and Jekyll decided to do a little anti-gun violence protest inside of the legislative chamber. This is what these guys are seeing. They're scared. And when you look at how these guys keep taking L after L, they should be. So in a way, I can see why the wealthy white donors would want to start their efforts at home, so to speak, because they got all kinds of problems there. But for him to talk about outrage for outrage's sake is a joke. Stoking phony white outrage was his entire MO, and he managed to get some quickie attention for himself out of it. And in the age of social media, attention is the coin of the realm. It was inevitable that all of these copycats out here who think they're going to be the next Rush Limbaugh, the next Sean Hannity, or at the very least that they're going to be the next Alex Jones, of course they're going to be sitting here copying the crap that Rufo does. Because they think, hey, if this idiot can get on television, anybody can do it. Rufo made some moron squeaks about building a counterculture, but what culture has he ever started? Now, the reason I wanted to make this the topic of this morning's briefing is because there is a lesson of sorts in this for all of us as well. When you have people who don't understand what their priorities ought to be, they're going to fail. When you start a culture war without having first established and cultivated your own subculture, then you'll fail because you don't have a proper foundation. You don't have a base, not a real one. Rich donors can help you get some quickie headlines. They can pay some fools to stand behind you, but that's not the same as a movement, because it doesn't represent any real social change. That's the reason why I told you about that Al Jazeera documentary, The Lobby USA. One of the things that AIPAC and their affiliated co-organizations would do is they would actually be paying people to go to these universities and counter-protest against pro-Palestinian demonstrators. But if your movement is organic and it has real support from the people, you shouldn't have to pay anyone at all. The Palestinians certainly don't. So all of these people who were running around spouting the AIPAC line, they were nothing more than paid day laborers. And when the money stops, so do they. It's a game that they're playing with themselves. But it also provides us with a lesson as well. There is a necessity to weed out the bootlicks, weed out the hangers-on, the people trying to use a movement to help themselves instead of help their people. It's a simple fact that there's too many people who are waiting in the wings to try to make an opportunity out of the oppression that we suffer. We got to make sure we stay on top of that. Though regardless of how, Rufo is finally figuring out that his little revolution has already crashed on the rocks. The little racial grift that he was planning on making into a career out of is running out of gas. And as for his benefactor DeSantis, well, unless the Florida Constitution is amended, he won't be able to run for re-election as governor in 2026. Florida law prohibits a governor from running for more than 2 terms at a time, so at least for the next few years, Rufo's going to have to look for a new benefactor, but then again, the good old boys down there are pretty slow. So they're going to be the last ones to figure out that this guy isn't bringing any sort of value to their racist operation and that they're basically just giving him freebies for nothing. But then again, all of those clowns down there just ripping off the taxpayers, they're all screwing the system. That's how a half-wit like Rufo winds up on a college board because it had to be given to him because he wasn't smart enough to get it on his own. And this is the same kind of person who will claim that other people are getting handouts and having stuff just handed to them. No. White privilege is the largest and longest standing handout program in human history, and people like Rufo are always feeding at the trough on that one. Well, he better go ahead and try to get while the getting's good, because his 15 minutes of fame are pretty much up. There's a lesson that he should have taken away from all this, but he's too dense to get it. In politics, perception is reality, and if you're perceived as being a political has-been whose strategies don't work and whose ideas aren't effective, then your reality will become pretty bleak. good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Burkett Cochrane, Ricky Vaughn, Ronald Waits, Nicholas Moore, and Terrence Gaines. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.